In Dusty Rock, a town where gossip sticks faster than boot mud, Clara was the punchline. Folks called her Crazy Clara behind her back, whispering about the old sluice pan on her porch and the gold her father once claimed was buried in her land. No one believed it. No one cared, except one cowboy. Elijah Boone wasn't a hero. He just came for feed and stayed for something quieter: truth. When he saw the mayor snooping near Clara's fence with a man dressed too clean for farming, he didn't laugh. He listened. And when a city notice threatened to take her land, he stood firm. Turns out truth has a way of hiding in plain sight, under dust, between boot tracks, and in the steady hands of those who don't shout to be heard. In a town chasing railroads and rumors, Clara and Elijah dig deeper, into land, lies, and the roots of what's right. Will justice rise from the dirt, or will power bury it again? If you believe a good heart can still outlast a crooked plan, and that real gold's found in character, then saddle up and hit that subscribe button. This story's got more than fool's gold in it. The saloon doors creaked behind Elijah Boone as he stepped into the cool shadow of Dusty Rock's only watering hole. It was mid-afternoon and the regulars had settled into their usual rhythm: half-empty whiskey glasses, dusty boots propped on stools, and the kind of laughter that had too much meanness baked into it. He wasn't planning to stay long, just water his mule, grab a sack of oats, and ride on before sundown. But the name that caught his ear changed that. "Crazy Clara," one man chuckled, raising his glass. "Out there panning the creek like it's California in '49. Another snorted. "Swears her land's got gold. Only thing buried out there is her daddy's bad luck." Elijah leaned on the bar, keeping quiet, but watching. The laughter rolled on, tinged with the smugness that only small towns perfected. The woman they mocked didn't sound crazy to him, just outnumbered. Outside, the heat simmered off the dirt road as he led his mule down the trail. Clara's homestead was 3 miles west of town, where the land turned rocky and the trees thinned. He wasn't headed that way, but something in his gut shifted. A pull, like a loose nail catching a boot heel. He turned. Clara Talley's place sat low and stubborn on a rise, framed by dry creek beds and brittle sage. As Elijah approached, he saw her out front, wrestling with a stubborn feed bag beside a goat pen. "You look like you're losing the argument," he called. She looked up, squinting into the sun. Her face was plain, soft-featured, with the kind of strength that didn't shout, just endured. "Depends who you're rooting for," she said, brushing her hands on her skirt. "I heard you sell oats." She nodded. 2 cents cheaper than the mercantile, and I won't cheat you on the scale. As she measured the grain, Elijah noticed the rusted sluice pan leaning near her porch. Dented, well used, not for show. "You really panning out here?" he asked, tone easy. Clara's eyes didn't flinch. "I wash silt on Sundays. My daddy believed the land held something. I don't expect folks to agree." "I ain't folks," Elijah replied. "Just curious." She handed him the sack. "Curious folk don't usually pay. You did." He tipped his hat, but before he could mount, his gaze drifted toward the back fence. A man stood near the edge, slim, in a pressed coat too clean for ranch work. He held a leather case and scribbled in a notepad. Another man beside him tapped along the ground with a surveyor's rod. Clara hadn't seen them yet. "That man behind your fence," Elijah said softly. "You expecting visitors?" Clara turned. Her expression hardened. "No." Elijah stayed silent as she marched toward the ridge, skirts brushing dry grass. But by the time she reached it, the men were already heading back toward a waiting wagon. One tipped his hat mockingly. She watched them leave, jaw set. "Elijah, was it?" He nodded. "I appreciate the oats business," she said, voice low. "But if you're looking to make sport of me like the saloon boys, don't come back." "I don't mock what I don't understand," he said plainly. She studied him a moment, then turned without another word and walked toward the cabin. That night, Elijah made camp near the old rail cut, just a quarter mile from Clara's spread. The stars were out, bright, indifferent. Coyotes yipped in the hills. But what kept him awake wasn't the howl of wild things. It was the way the man at Clara's fence hadn't looked like he cared about goats or grain. The next morning, Elijah passed back by the Tally homestead and stopped cold. Nailed to the front gate was a notice, crisp and official-looking. Notice of Municipal Review, Parcel 17B, subject to acquisition review. The paper fluttered in the breeze like a warning, or a threat, and Clara, standing just inside the fence line, stared at it like she'd seen it coming her whole life. She didn't say a word, but Elijah did. This ain't over. By mid-morning, word had already spread across. Dusty Rock, Clara Tally's place, Parcel 17B, was under municipal review. At the corner cafe, the ranch hands murmured behind mugs. At the mercantile, the clerk didn't ask, just smirked when Clara's name came up. The whole town could smell the dust before the stampede. Elijah Boone rode into town with his coat flapping and his jaw tight. He tied his mule out front of the courthouse and walked inside, boots echoing against the floorboards. A clerk at the front desk looked up with a practiced smile. "Can I help you?" "Looking for property records on Parcel 17B. Name's Tally." The clerk flipped through a leather-bound book. "Says here taxes went unpaid for 3 years. Foreclosure initiated." "That can't be," Elijah said. "She showed me her receipts." "Receipts?" The man lifted a brow. "Got 'em on hand?" "Clara does. I saw 'em. Stamped, dated, but no clerk's name or seal." The clerk shook his head. "Then they ain't official. Sorry, mister." "Funny how that works," Elijah muttered. Back at Clara's, she was sitting on the steps, a weathered box of receipts on her lap. Her goats grazed peacefully like the world hadn't tilted beneath them. "I checked the books," Elijah said as he stepped down from his mule. "Town's claiming back taxes. But those receipts you got? No clerk stamp, no initials, just ink." Clara nodded without surprise. "Daddy always paid in person. Said Harlan preferred it that way. Keep the books light." Elijah frowned. "You mean the mayor?" She stood and dusted her skirt. "He used to come around himself. Said folks who owed him stayed in line easier." "And you stayed out of line?" "I didn't marry, didn't sell, didn't ask for favors." They stood in silence for a long beat. "I remember something," she said quietly. "Daddy once told me, if things ever got bad, to check behind the well house. Said it's where he kept the last word on the land." Elijah followed as she led him to the well house out back, a squat wooden shed leaning slightly with age. Behind it, she dropped to her knees, brushing dry weeds aside until her fingers caught a loose stone in the foundation. Beneath it, buried in dirt and tin, was a small iron lockbox, rusted, heavy. The latch took some work, but it gave with a soft clink. Inside were a few old deeds, a folded newspaper clipping, and a sealed envelope with the U.S. Mineral Rights Bureau stamped across the front. Clara stared at it like it might vanish. Elijah reached in, pulling it open carefully. There was a stub, half torn but legible. It referenced a 1902 mineral claim filed by Thomas Tally, with rights passed to minor heir Clara Tally upon registration of birth. He handed her the second document, a birth certificate, her name, her father's signature, the same parcel number inked in the margin. "This ties you to the original claim," he said slowly. "It ain't just about taxes. It's about what's under your land." Clara's voice was barely a whisper. Daddy wasn't chasing ghosts. "No, ma'am," Elijah said, "but someone else might be." That night, they sat on her porch beneath a soft summer breeze. The lantern between them glowed warm. The creek whispered faintly behind the trees. "I'm not looking for gold," she said. "I don't think you are," Elijah answered, "but I think someone else thinks they've already found it." She looked at him, steady now. "If I stand, it'll get harder. They'll press louder." "You won't stand alone," he said. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. And in Dusty Rock, that was as good as a promise. The next morning, Elijah walked the dry creek bed behind Clara's land, sluice pan tucked under one arm, boots crunching soft gravel beneath him. He didn't believe in miracles, but he did believe in gut feelings, and his gut was telling him there was more to this dust than just drought and rumors. He stopped near a bend where the water still trickled faintly over a shelf of rock. Kneeling, he filled the pan with silt and let the water swirl. The technique was crude. He hadn't panned since he was a boy helping his uncle in the Colorado hills, but muscle memory kicked in. 10 minutes later, something caught the light. A single fleck, no bigger than a grain of sand, but unmistakable. Gold. Elijah stared at it, not with greed, but with a slow-building storm of concern. Clara's father hadn't been chasing shadows. He'd been close, too close. By noon, Elijah had hitched up his mule and ridden into the outer ridge near Pine Hollow, where he knew a man named Amos Tucker spent most of his days pretending to fish and avoiding the world. A former prospector, part-time pipe smoker, and full-time skeptic, Amos was known for being two things: honest and hard to impress. Elijah found him under a cottonwood tree, picking his teeth with a dry reed. "You're either lost or stupid, Boone," Amos said, not looking up. "I don't do favors, and I sure don't entertain uninvited guests." "I found something," Elijah said simply, and held out the pan. Amos raised one eyebrow, took the pan, and angled it in the sun. Then he reached for his magnifier and looked again. "You pan this?" "I did." "Where?" "Clara Talley's creek bed." Amos snorted. "That dusty thing? Thought she was digging for ghosts." "Turns out ghosts sparkle." Amos stood slowly, bones popping like firewood. "All right, I'll come see." Back at Clara's, the woman met them with wary eyes, but she didn't turn them away. Amos walked the creek twice, filled 2 pans, and ran careful swirls with a precision Elijah lacked. Then he sat down on an overturned bucket and whistled low. "Well, I'll be. It ain't a mother lode, but it's real. Placer gold, river-born. This creek carried it at some point." Clara's hands tightened around her apron. "So it's worth something?" "Enough to catch attention, not enough to stay quiet." Elijah knelt beside a patch of loose earth near the base of a willow tree. "Amos, this ground look disturbed to you?" Amos scratched his beard. "Could be natural, or someone did a quick dig and filled it back in." "Why hide a dig?" Elijah asked. Amos stood, squinting into the sun. "'Cause if there's gold here and word gets out, claim jumpers won't wait for paperwork. And if someone already knows, they ain't gonna stop with notices and rumors." Clara's voice cut through the warm air. "You think the mayor already tried?" "I think," Amos said slowly, "someone didn't want you to know what you were sitting on." That night, Elijah didn't camp by the creek. He set up under Clara's porch with a rifle in his lap and a coffee tin on the step. The stars were clear, but his mind wasn't. This was no longer about whispers or forgotten receipts. It was about land, ownership, truth. And someone, somewhere, had already decided Clara didn't deserve any of it. From inside, her voice was soft. "You think we've got enough to fight?" He didn't look back. "Maybe not yet, but we've got enough to make someone nervous." And in Dusty Rock, that was a start. The air in Dusty Rock buzzed with celebration the following Saturday. Red bunting draped across porches, children ran through the streets with sticky fingers, and the town square brimmed with laughter and fried pie stands. Founders Day had arrived, and Mayor Harlan made sure his name was on every banner. Clara didn't plan on going, but Amos showed up on her porch with his sleeves rolled and stubbornness stitched into every line of his face. "You stay home, folks'll think you're hiding something. Walk into town calm, chin up, let 'em wonder what you know." Elijah stood behind her, arms folded, nodding. "He's right. Silence lets 'em write the story. Showing up tells it your way." So Clara Talley dusted off her father's old Sunday coat, pinned her hair back, and walked into town beside 2 men who didn't think she was crazy. The town square was a wave of color and noise, but Elijah's eyes swept past the festivities. He caught sight of Mayor Harlan standing near the stage, slick in a blue vest that didn't fit the weather. Next to him, a man with a clipboard and a railroad company pin scribbled notes. "Town of Dusty Rock," Harlan bellowed into a microphone fashioned from a tin funnel, has been selected as a potential site for a future railway junction. It'll bring jobs, opportunity, and prosperity to every man, woman, and child. The crowd erupted in cheers. Harlan raised a hand. There's one parcel left, he added with a smug grin, that we're in talks to acquire for the junction. It's just unused land west of the creek, currently under municipal review. Elijah felt Clara tense beside him. That's my land, she said. Every head turned. The music stopped. Clara stepped forward, holding up a folded parchment. This is the mineral stub from the U.S. Bureau, and this, she unfolded a second paper, ties me to the landholder, my father, who never sold, never forfeited, and never gave you permission. The silence cracked like a whip. Mayor Harlan blinked, then smoothed his mustache. Miss Tally, this isn't the place. Funny, she cut in, her voice steady, since you made it one. Behind her, Amos raised a weathered hand and said, I've tested that land myself, found gold dust, real placer gold, enough to warrant a claim. Gasps swept through the crowd like prairie wind. Elijah watched Harlan's face tighten. A flicker, just long enough to see the mask slip. Anyone who wants a copy of the deed, Clara added, can stop by my porch. I've got coffee and receipts. Then she turned and walked away. And for the first time in years, no one laughed at her back. But Dusty Rock had long memories and short patience. That night, as Elijah made his rounds past the goat pens, a sharp crack split the silence. He rushed toward the cabin, door ajar, papers scattered like leaves. The place had been torn apart. The ledger Clara kept of receipts and observations was missing. The lock had been smashed clean off. Clara stood in the doorway, arms wrapped tight around herself. Not crying, just quiet. Elijah knelt in the mud just outside and spotted something odd. A boot print, deep, clean, and chipped at the heel. He reached into his coat and pulled out the heel fragment he'd pocketed earlier from the town square. Same notch, same size, same make as the boots worn by Deputy Monroe, Mayor Harlan's right-hand man. They're not just circling now, Elijah said, rising. They're biting. Clara looked up, fire building in her eyes. Then they'd better expect teeth. By sunrise the next morning, Clara's porch was lined with boxes, papers, receipts, the mineral stub, and her father's birth grant folded inside a tin of biscuits. Elijah loaded them gently into a canvas satchel while Amos hitched the mule. Clara stood by the fence, quiet but resolved. We file today, she said, no matter what. They rode out before breakfast, dust trailing behind them on the way to the county clerk's office. Elijah handed over the documents while Clara signed in careful script. The clerk, a balding man with spectacles that kept slipping down his nose, raised a brow when he saw Amos's signature on the mineral findings. You sure you want this on record, miss? He asked. Puts a target on your back. Clara didn't flinch. That target's been there a while. He nodded once and stamped the paper. Filed and sealed. You're officially claimant of Parcel 17B. Surface and subsurface rights pending further review, but this gives you standing. Outside, Clara exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for a decade. That piece of paper, Amos said, don't change the heart of a coward, just makes him more scared. They returned to the ranch by late afternoon, tired but hopeful. Clara headed inside to boil coffee. Elijah checked the fence line and let the goats out to graze. The peace lasted all of 10 minutes. A rider kicked up dust across the ridge, Deputy Monroe, his mouth curved into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Afternoon, he said, dismounting. Here to collect payment on outstanding land assessments. Town council voted. We're seizing livestock as partial settlement. You can't take her goats, Elijah said, stepping between Monroe and the gate. I got orders, Boone. Elijah pulled the stamped receipt from his coat pocket. And I got a fresh filing backed by county seal. Any seizure now's interference with legal process. Monroe glanced at the paper. He didn't take it, just spat in the dirt and swung back into his saddle. We'll see how long your luck holds. That night, the wind shifted. Elijah woke to the smell first, sharp, bitter, unnatural. He bolted upright on the porch cot just as flames licked the eastern edge of the barn. He shouted for Clara and sprinted toward the structure. Inside, the goats were panicked, kicking at the pen. Elijah threw open the gate, waving his arms to push them out. Clara arrived with a bucket in each hand. Amos came running from the road with a wool blanket soaked in well water. Together they fought it down. Smoldering wood hissed in protest. The roof collapsed inward, but the livestock escaped unharmed. When the smoke cleared, Elijah circled the back. Near the hay pile, he found a broken lantern neck and the faint trace of boot tracks. One heel mark had a chip, the same one he'd matched 2 nights earlier. He brought it back to Clara and dropped it on the porch. "Same heel," he said grimly. "Same print." Clara's hands trembled as she poured water into mugs. "They tried to scare me quiet." "Then they don't know you," Elijah replied. Amos shook his head. "I know men like Harlan. This ain't about land. It's about making folks believe they can't fight back." Elijah looked down at the still smoking remains of the barn. "Then it's time we make 'em believe something else." Just then, Amos's eyes lit up. "I rode by the post station on the way over. Got news. That mining outfit we sent samples to, they're interested. Said they might offer to buy in, if we can prove consistent yield for 2 days. Clara stared at him. 2 days? He nodded. 48 hours, 2 pans, no funny business. Elijah grinned, tired but determined. Then let's give him something real to weigh. Elijah barely had time to wash the soot from his hands before the trouble came riding back. This time it wasn't Monroe alone. It was 2 deputies, stiff-backed and silent, eyes fixed cold as river stone. "You're under arrest, Boone," Monroe said, drawing out each word like he was savoring them. "Charge is interference with municipal business. Also got a claim of trespass from the mayor's office." Clara stepped between them, fury in her chest and fists clenched. "You mean stopping you from stealing my goats?" she said. Monroe didn't flinch. "You can file a complaint. After he cools off in a cell." Elijah didn't resist. He met Clara's eyes and gave the smallest nod. "Let it happen. Keep panning. Amos'll help you." The jail in Dusty Rock was 2 cells and a desk shoved into the back of the town records building. The bars were rusty, the cot sagged, and the only ventilation came from a cracked window too high to reach. Elijah sat on the cot and stretched his sore arms. His palms still smelled like burned pine. The sheriff hadn't come, just Monroe, slamming the door with more force than needed and stomping off like he'd just won something. A voice spoke from the other cell. "You don't look like the usual drunks they toss in here." Elijah turned. A man with wiry gray hair and a crooked nose sat cross-legged on his cot, carving something into a block of cedar with a penknife. His clothes were ragged, but his posture was alert, sharp, like a man used to being ignored and underestimated. "Name's Walter," he said. "Walter Lorne. Who'd you make mad?" "Mayor Harlan," Elijah replied. Walter chuckled. "That tracks. He's the reason I'm in here." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "You too?" "Oh, he don't like folks who know too much," Walter said, tapping the cedar block. "I used to work federal geology, assessments, surveys, retired early. Came through Dusty Rock 2 years back on a contract. Looked at a few parcels. One caught my eye." "Clara's?" Walter nodded slowly. "Yep. Low-yield trace minerals. Gold mostly, but there's more if you dig deep. I filed the report, but it disappeared. Next thing I know, I'm hauled in for disturbing the peace after asking too many questions." Elijah sat up straighter. "You remember the exact boundaries?" "Every inch. I don't forget terrain." Elijah rubbed his jaw. "Would you testify?" Walter shrugged. "Depends. Is she still standing her ground?" "She's tougher than most men I've met." "Then maybe I would, but you'll need leverage." Outside, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Monroe returned, holding a crumpled slip of paper. "Visitor for Boone," he said, tossing the note through the bars. "Don't know why she's bothering." Elijah unfolded the paper. Clara's handwriting was neat, even in haste. "We finished the first pan. Amos says it's clean. Second batch coming tomorrow. Hold tight." His chest lifted slightly. She was holding the line. That evening, the door creaked open again. Clara stepped in, flanked by Amos. She held a folder thick with papers. Her hands trembled, but her chin was high. I'm filing a motion with the territorial office, she told Monroe, who looked startled. You're holding Elijah without warrant. I've got the deed, the mineral stub, the filing receipt, and now a signed affidavit from Amos confirming gold recovery over 2 days. Walter whistled low behind the bars. Well, I'll be. And, Clara added, pulling one more document from the folder, I brought a copy of my father's land grant, signed and notarized in 1872. It predates the town charter. Monroe faltered. Amos grinned. And the clerk up in Cold Ridge said they'll send a marshal down if the motion's ignored. Monroe glared at Elijah, then backed out wordlessly. Clara pressed her palm to the bars. 1 more night, maybe 2, then you'll be free. Elijah touched her fingers through the iron. You already got me free, Clara, just by showing up. Sunday mornings in Dusty Rock usually meant silence, church bells and coffee pots, not heated meetings and town-wide murmurs. But this one was different. The general store had been cleared out, chairs pulled into rough rows, and townsfolk trickled in like cattle sensing a storm. Word had spread. Clara Talbot was making a public claim, and Elijah Boone, now released on bond thanks to the motion filed by Amos and Clara, was walking free beside her. Mayor Harlan stood at the front with a practiced smile and 2 deputies flanking him. He raised his voice as folks settled. We've gathered here today, he began, to address confusion regarding land claims and recent filings made by Miss Clara Talbot. Let's be civil. Elijah stepped forward. You want civil? Then let's be honest. He laid 3 documents flat on the counter. Filed mineral claim, he said, stamped and witnessed. He added the next. Original deed to the Talbot property, dated and notarized before this town had a charter. Then he looked up at the crowd. And this, Walter Lorne's statement, a federal geologist who assessed the land years ago and was locked up for saying it was valuable. There were gasps and hushed murmurs. Walter, weathered but upright, stepped out from the side wall, nodding slowly. I signed this affidavit yesterday, he said, and I'll swear it in any court you ask. Harlan tried to recover. This is an ambush. None of this proves, Amos Tucker cut in. Don't need proof of character, Harlan. That ship sailed when you sent your boys to light a barn. He pulled a sealed envelope from his vest. Mining outfit out of Wichita sent this. Read it. A clerk opened it. His voice trembled as he read. We are prepared to make a conditional offer to Miss Talbot for surface and subsurface mineral rights, pending verification. Samples reviewed are consistent with profitable extraction. Someone in the crowd clapped, then another. It wasn't a cheer, not yet, but it was coming alive. Clara stepped up, quiet as always, but her voice held. I never asked anyone to believe in gold, just to believe I had the right to prove it. She unfolded a final letter, hand-stamped and signed by the U.S. Mineral Office. This is confirmation of my exclusive surface and subsurface rights as legal heir and recorded claimant. Elijah locked eyes with the sheriff, who now stood unsure, boots shifting like a man realizing he was on thin ice. And then Boone stepped forward. Mayor Harlan kept this town locked in fear, whispered lies, buried reports, burned barns. He paused. But the truth has a longer reach than a match. Harlan opened his mouth, but before he could speak, another voice rang out. I got something to say. It was Mary Beth Crenshaw, the postmaster. She held a small black ledger. This here's the mayor's discretionary account. I processed his personal mail last month. This fell out. She flipped to a page. Payouts, dates, names. 17 entries marked to local assessors, surveyors, even one to Monroe. Now the room stirred. Real fear, real anger. The sheriff took the book and stepped back, lips tightening. Harlan's face paled. This is slander. No, said Clara. This is justice catching up. The sheriff raised his hand. Mayor Harlan, until further investigation, you're suspended from office. Deputies, escort him out. Harlan protested, voice rising, but no one listened anymore. As he was led away, the crowd parted, silent now, not out of respect, but because his power had dried up like a summer creek. Clara's eyes glistened. Elijah touched the brim of his hat. She whispered, I think my daddy would have liked this day. Elijah nodded. He'd be proud. And not because there's gold in your dirt, but because you never let anyone take your name from it. The following morning in Dusty Rock was still, but the hush wasn't peace. It was the kind that hangs in the air before a storm breaks loose. Mayor Harlan had been escorted out under deputy guard the day before, but no one had seen him since. Rumors spread fast. Some said he'd taken a train east under a false name. Others swore he was holed up in his ranch house burning papers. Inside the general store's back room, now turned makeshift office, Clara, Elijah, Amos, and Walter Lorne sat around a narrow table while Sheriff Dunley paced the floor. Walter tapped the affidavit he'd submitted to the territorial marshal. That ledger from the postmaster matches dates with altered survey filings from the county office. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was orchestrated theft. The sheriff nodded grimly. I've never liked the way Harlan ran things, but it wasn't till now I realized how deep he dug. Amos leaned forward. He's been bribing folks to bury mineral assessments, forge signatures, and wipe property records. And not just Clara's, Elijah added. That ledger had more names. Folks who lost land last winter, even a school plot 2 miles north. The sheriff looked tired, like the weight of everything just caught up to him. The state marshal's sending an investigator. Till then, I'm freezing all land reassessments filed by Harlan's office. Clara sat silent for a beat. Then she said, I want my goats back. Everyone chuckled softly, tension breaking like a tight rope finally slackening. By noon, the town square was buzzing. Clara stood on the courthouse steps, papers in hand, as Sheriff Dunley addressed the gathered townsfolk. The mayor's been suspended pending a full investigation into land fraud, bribery, and obstruction. All actions taken on Clara Talbot's property in the past 12 months are hereby declared invalid. He turned to Clara and handed her a formal document. You now have full ownership protection under federal and territorial mineral law. The crowd applauded, not rowdy or theatrical, but genuine. A few folks who'd once crossed the street to avoid Clara now nodded in respect. A man in a dark coat stepped forward, sharp suit, dustless boots. Miss Talbot? He asked. Clara squinted. Yes? I represent Ridge and Hollow Mining. My partners and I would like to extend a formal purchase offer. Favorable terms. We'd respect your boundaries, and you'd keep residence rights. Clara glanced at Elijah. He just gave her a smile. Your land, Clara. Your choice. She looked back at the man. I'll consider it. But this land's not just soil to me. It's story. The man nodded. Take all the time you need. As the crowd dispersed, a few children darted past, pointing at the old sluice box beside Clara's porch. Is that where the gold came from, Miss Talbot? One asked, wide-eyed. She crouched beside him. That's where it started, maybe. But the gold was always just proof. The real treasure's standing your ground when folks laugh. That evening, Elijah stood by the edge of her porch, arms crossed as the sun dropped behind the hills. You gonna take the deal? He asked. Clara leaned against the railing. Maybe part of it, enough to fix what's broken, but not enough to give up what matters. I figured you'd say that. She turned toward him. And you? You still leaving? Elijah paused. Not sure. This place has roots now, real ones. A breeze rustled the porch herbs, and a candle flickered behind the cabin window. I never needed a hero, Clara said softly. Just someone who didn't walk away. Elijah tipped his hat. Well, ma'am, I'm not much for walking away. And for the first time, her smile came easy, like it belonged there all along. Spring came early to Dusty Rock. The rains held steady just long enough to green the hills, and for the first time in years, Clara's patch of land didn't look like it was holding its breath. Elijah rolled up his sleeves, balanced a fresh stovepipe on his shoulder, and walked toward the cabin. Careful on that ladder, he called. If you fall, I'm not carrying you to town. You're too stubborn for doctoring. Clara peeked her head from the roof, hammer in hand and hair tied up with a red cloth. I'll take my chances. You'd grumble all the way anyway. Amos chuckled from the ground, handing Elijah a length of wire. You two squabble like you've been married a decade. We're not, they said in unison, and paused. Clara climbed down the ladder and brushed sawdust off her skirt. But I am grateful. All of this, it's more than repairs. The cabin, once gray and sagging, now stood proud with a fresh coat of paint and a rebuilt porch. The new sluice Elijah and Walter installed ran clear from the creek, its channel lined with smoothed stones and a hand-carved sign that read, Tally Creek Claim, established 1871. Walter had stayed on, offering his skills as both advisor and friend. He was half-blind and twice as opinionated, but he had a sharp mind and a gentle touch when teaching local kids about minerals and maps. The children from town no longer snickered at Clara's gate. They waved, some even stopping by with wildflowers or questions about gold. One morning, Elijah caught Clara showing two young girls how to pan silt, her voice low and patient. Don't rush it. You have to trust the weight of things. The real stuff sinks. He'd stayed back, letting the moment breathe. There was something healing in watching her teach with no fear in her voice. Now, as the sun dropped low, painting the fields gold, Clara poured them each a cup of chicory coffee. They sat on the steps, boots muddy, hands calloused. You know, she said quietly, I used to think survival meant staying quiet, not drawing attention. Elijah sipped and nodded. A lot of folks think that. But now I know. Speaking up doesn't make you weaker, just louder than fear. He looked at her, the last orange light catching in her eyes. You were never weak, Clara. You just needed someone to see it. She leaned back, shoulders easing. I never wanted gold. I wanted roots, something to belong to. Well, he said, tipping his hat back, you've got roots now, and goats, and an old prospector who never leaves before supper. Amos hollered from the window. I heard that, and if you burn the cornbread again, I'm setting up camp with the goats. Laughter broke the quiet, soft and full. Clara turned to Elijah. So, what about you? You heading out now that the storm's passed? He looked out across the pasture where fence lines were finally straight and the creek trickled steady. Thing is, he said, I came here to fix a horseshoe and mind my own business. But I found more than I expected. Turns out, fixing fences feels a lot like finding home. She didn't say anything for a while, just reached for his hand and held it like it had always been there. Then I guess you better help me name this place, she said. Can't keep calling it Clara's land forever. He grinned. How about Tally and Boone? She smiled. Too many syllables. They sat in the quiet again, not needing more words. Just the sound of spring, the hum of water, and the peace that comes when truth finally settles. If you believe folks deserve better than gossip, and that truth still rides with the quiet ones, saddle up and subscribe. There's always another story just down the trail.